Hey everybody, welcome inside Nashville Sounds Baseball. It's Jeff Hem here with you, joined by the General Manager and COO of the Nashville Sounds, Adam Nuse, for a special edition of Rounding Third, which normally lives as an audio podcast through Apple Podcasts, and you can, if you're hearing us today audio only, hopefully you're a subscriber of the Rounding Third podcast. If you're watching us on video, welcome and thank you for following the Sounds on social media and on our YouTube channel. And we hope you'll check out the Rounding Third podcast in its audio form, while those listening today hopefully are already following the Sounds on social media. But if not, please remember to do so as the Sounds navigate, Adam, what's been totally unpredictable in 2020. I mean, I know all the cliches get used about who could have known that any of this was going to go down. But here we are, the first week of August. There's been basically no baseball on the field here at First Horizon Park at all this year, and there will not be in 2020. I mean, do you step back? How often do you step back and just kind of look at what's happened this year and think, how did we get here? This is just a weird, sometimes scary, certainly unique year that this has been.
Yeah, unbelievable. And I think of the buzzwords, pivot, crystal ball, all those things that we've been trying to predict, and nobody could have predicted this. I remember having a conversation with some friends in this business, and I thought there was no way we would miss opening day. And looking back at some of the text messages early March, late February, like, what are the odds of opening day happening? And I was like, oh, we definitely are happening. And I'm such an optimistic guy in general, and never would have thought that it would continue on this long. But thankfully we have the best staff in all of sports, so we keep pivoting and doing different things and coming up with different ways to make it work.
I was going to ask you about that optimism, because you're right. You are one of the most optimistic guys I know. And even on days where you might be frustrated or you are in a bad mood, you rarely show it. So how challenging has this been just for you as a human, overseeing a sound staff, trying to get something on the field or in the ballpark where so much of this is just out of our control? Best laid plans can only take you so far. And as an optimistic guy, I've got to think this is just eating at you because you can't control most of it.
Yeah, this is, I think, the beauty of minor league baseball is anything that we dream up, we usually do. And rarely do we run into situations where somebody's telling us no, especially somebody from a government side or just the rules in the world. Never have we been in this situation that if we didn't dream it up, we couldn't do. And sometimes I feel like we're in college athletics or some of those where there's some mandatory rules that you have to follow. Minor league baseball, not a lot of rules. Yeah. So it makes me appreciate the job that we have and the flexibility that we have to do cool things. And we'll get back there, just waiting for people to tell us we can do it.
You mentioned March, and I want to go back to that and then work our way forward, because you and I and a few others of the Sound staff went to Arizona that first week of March when spring training was going on. And I remember the coronavirus at that time being talked about. It was out there. I remember being on the news, on the television, in the hotel when we were out there, and it was sort of mentioned, not in passing, but kind of casually around the ballpark those days. Nobody knew what was going to eventually transpire. So we came back, at least I came back from that trip, concerned, but not really thinking that it was going to lead to what it's led to. When was the moment for you where you realized, like, oh man, we've got not only a problem, but what could be a long-term problem? Because I think it was the week after we got back from Arizona when the NBA shut down, ultimately the NCAA tournament shuts down. Were those the warning signs for you that then the minor league season was going to have some jeopardy?
Yeah, I can remember taking my 10-year-old daughter with us to spring training, and my wife was like, I don't know if y'all should go. And I thought she was crazy. And we obviously went, but then when they came back and I had tickets to the SEC tournament here in Nashville, and all of a sudden that game got canceled last minute, and then they canceled March Madness. I thought, who would have thought that they would cancel March Madness, such a huge event? And that was kind of the first event that I was like, this opening day might not happen.
Yeah.
And certainly didn't think that it would continue past that. I thought it was short term, but that was the first big alarming move that I saw.
Well, and I remember too at that time, the other element, I mean, minor league teams across the country were dealing with what you just described, but then here in Nashville, The tornado had come through, literally through the area that we're sitting in, affecting all kinds of people in all different ways. And so I remember we got back from that trip and it was, well, let's get our hands dirty with the cleanup efforts of the tornado, which even put COVID-19 farther out of my mind, just speaking for me personally, because it was like, that's not the immediate, but that was just as problematic then toward the season happening. It was just this weird timeline of things that you had to deal with.
Yeah, and thinking back at the tornado, my 20 years of working in this business, I think it was my favorite moment coming back in a time of need and watching our staff without us here. They just took it upon themselves to be the front porch of this community, and they were already employing folks from all around Nashville to go help out, deploying people out into the areas of need. And so we just got here and jumped right in, ended up donating $100,000 back to the community, which was just a fun thing to get to see kind of what our role in this community could be, and especially as close as it was. I was proud of our staff jumped in and really became leaders in this community right before our eyes.
So you get into late March, early April, we realize that minor league baseball officially announces that the season will be delayed. Take us through your memories of some of the different conversations that were happening back then as we were all hoping for some version of a shortened regular season. I know you were in contacts with the league, with the folks at our parent club, the Rangers. Everybody was just trying to get answers to questions, and what's the new latest timeline? What was that period like?
Yeah, I think the partnership with the Texas Rangers was huge for us, because they were, the owners were talking with us about what they were hearing in owners meetings. So that was a huge benefit to us. But looking back, a lot of that information ended up obviously being wrong. Nobody had the crystal ball on it, but I can still remember May 12th being the day that once opening day didn't happen, May 12th was the day that it would for sure happen. So we operated for a good month and a half on knowing May 12th was going to be the day, and obviously that came and went and nothing happened. But every step we got more optimistic that it was going to happen, and then it just kept never happening. And obviously huge challenges to that happening.
That's where, again, your optimism and I felt it along the way too. It's amazing the range of emotions that this whole issue can bring, because I remember there were days in April thinking like, it's going to be tough for this season to happen at all, and then I'd hear one report or see something or hear a rumbling of updated potential schedule or whatever, and you're thinking, okay, if we can get going by June 1, that leaves you X number of games. Like it was like I could see it both ways, and it was equally exciting and equally frustrating, and I'm sure it was tenfold given your position back then.
Yeah, and trying to communicate to our staff what we're hearing, and just getting told so many different things. You kind of live on each of those promising days, and again, every time they came and went, it was certainly discouraging, and trying to reinvent ourselves after each announcement is just constant roller coaster.
Ultimately, a tweet from Jason Stark at The Athletic made public something that was already in the works for some time behind the scenes. Explain that timeline, and when did as what we eventually called it, the alternate season, when did that first start to become a possibility? Because I think fans might be surprised to realize you were trying to have that at the ready whenever the regular season may or may not have been canceled, which obviously it ultimately was.
Yeah, so way back to that May 12th day, when that came and went, then all of a sudden we were like, oh, we might need an alternate plan and come up with something. And so we were dreaming up concerts, movies at the ballpark, everything you can imagine, beer festivals, different things. And back in May, the rules were much looser. And so we thought we could still do things if baseball couldn't happen. And Alex Wassel on our staff called and said, hey, what if we get 2 or 4 teams just playing each other here? And we took that idea and just started rolling with it, and got Chad Seeley on our staff and Doug and you, and started looking at who are the prospects that are out there, who could we get, how do we make this happen? And it was unbelievable. Probably for 2 months, nothing slowed us down. Every time we wanted to do something or took something on, it worked. And so we thought, hey, this is going to happen. Everything's going in the right direction. And it wasn't until just recently that we started running into hurdles that we just couldn't get overcome.
And it was a pretty grassroots effort. I mean, you were essentially becoming an agent and a baseball operations general manager at the same time making these phone calls. How much did the Jason Stark tweet about MLB's potential involvement, how much did that amplify players then reaching out to you instead of you having to reach out to them?
Yeah, it was. We worked weeks before that on trying to come up with the best list of guys. I was going through and trying to figure out who the best second baseman out there was, and my test for them was where did they play last year, and if they were second baseman for the Yankees AAA team, they're probably good for us. And so we put a list of the guys that we wanted, had contact information, and then all of a sudden that tweet comes out. We were having some conversations with Major League Baseball, and then when they leaked it, I thought I leaked it. I was like, who did I tell? And so I called our contact at Major League Baseball, and they said, that's what it's like working with Major League Baseball is people find out stuff.
Yeah.
And so they leaked it, and once that happened, unbelievable amount of agents. We had the Boris Group calling all the time. We had every agent you could think of calling with trying to sell me on the players, their launch angle, their slider, all the different stats that I really don't care about. And so they were trying to sell me on it, but it was a pretty unique process, just trying to think through how these players fit in what we were trying to do.
Well, I would bet most people don't realize, I mean, you did and the agents knew because they're inside all of it, but most people probably had no idea the sheer volume of players that were looking for a chance to play somewhere, somehow. They just didn't know about the situation possibility here until it got out there, or unless you called them.
And I think that's what became pretty unique was that all the major league teams were starting to release these 30-year-old guys that have played 5-6 years in the big leagues, and they were releasing them to keep the 18-year-old prospects. And so there was unbelievable talent. We put together 45 guys for this team. Every one of them played in the big leagues at some capacity, had some service time. So a really compelling story we were putting together to show kind of the journey for these guys, getting released, getting kind of one last chance to keep playing. A lot of these players were telling us that if they didn't play this year, they probably wouldn't get to play. And just taking that year off is devastating for guys that are 30, kind of late in their career. But if they could keep playing, show what they have, then that opportunity is big for them.
I mentioned your title at the start, General Manager and Chief Operating Officer of the Sounds. You yourself have joked about that GM title over the years because, I mean, you and I both know how minor league baseball relative to Major League Baseball works. You've mentioned that you lead the Sounds from a business standpoint. Many people outside of the baseball world hear General Manager and they think you're like John Daniels or a Theo Epstein or a Billy Beane or whatever. But in this case, you sort of became that. It's kind of funny to me all the times you've joked about that title, but then as you're trying to plan the alternate season, you ended up like trying to negotiate contracts. What was that like for you?
Yeah, and it was funny. I talked to John Daniels pretty early on, the GM for the Rangers, and he was helping me with a list and trying to figure out who the best players were. And he said at one point, you might put a better team together than what we would have put together, just because the unbelievable amount of talent that was out there. So I was almost going to be set up to look like a hero, just because there's talent that should never be on the market, sitting out there without jobs because of the coronavirus. But it was a fun process, fun putting those guys together. We put a contract together. We were ready to go. Just got held up by the government.
One of those many things about negotiating with players and fielding a team, one of the many things I'm guessing that you ended up or have done in 2020 that you never would have thought back in January that was going to be on the table for you.
No doubt. And you know what, the journey's continuing. We're talking now about trying to become kind of an amphitheater and trying to figure out different ways that we can do things. So all things over the last few years, we've adapted a little bit more and done soccer at the ballpark. We've done Glow, a lot of different things, major concert. So all that kind of prepped us to what we're dealing with now. How do we utilize the ballpark for different ways and continue to do good things for the city?
I was going to ask that for a Sounds fan or a baseball fan or someone just living in Middle Tennessee who loves our venue for all the different things it is. As we are in the first week of August, what would you want them to know right now about what could happen here in the short term or looking at 2021?
Yeah, I think in the short term, knowing that we have the best staff in sports. So we have capable people here that are willing to do things. A lot of the requirements and the regulations that we have to deal with, we want to make sure our number one goal is to constantly improve that fan experience. And the fan experience is going to change with all the new regulations. So we want to make sure whatever we put out there is still going to be a great experience. And although it's going to be different, we're going to do everything to make sure fans are safe, but also try to create that same atmosphere that people are used to when they come out. So there's ideas of concerts, ideas of drone festivals, beer festivals, all sorts of things within those parameters. We've got plans for days on keeping that 6-foot distance, keeping masks on, and making sure safety's the priority. We're a Metro-owned facility, so we can't waver much on the regulations and the rules they put on us, but we're actively trying to do good things to bring some quality of life to Nashville.
And thinking about 2021 baseball for a moment, but I guess it would apply even to any events that could happen in 2020. What are some things that you learned or that got discussed with health department or with staff or in meetings, hoping and planning for that possible alternate season that you think will probably still apply as you host baseball fans in 2021? I know even before COVID-19, you were part of an effort to try to make this less and less of of cash use in the ballpark, and just credit card use and as one example, and that was already in the works. So what are some things that you think 2020 will have an impact on for 2021?
Yeah, the cashless trend has been going on for a while, and there's a lot of benefits from a business side, but as we look into stats and consumer behavior, most people are using credit cards or debit cards anyway. And when you start incorporating cash from a business side, that cash can go away with slippery fingers sometimes, and it helps control a lot of things that way, and you learn a lot more about your customers going that cashless direction.
Mm-hmm.
But that's probably the big initiative that I think we'll probably be forced into, is going cashless. I think originally we were talking about not making it mandatory, but suggesting that it's cashless, and I think now that all this has happened, you'll see a lot more of that all across the country, not just in minor league baseball.
And I remember a couple of years ago when metal detectors went into use here, and there was an adjustment period probably for fans who may not have gotten there as early as they wanted to. Very soon after that, it was like no big deal. And I would imagine you feel like while there might be some new things in 2021 when someone might come to the ballpark for the next time for a ball game, it becomes the new normal fairly quickly. People adapt to whatever they need to adapt to. I would imagine that's comforting to think about for you as someone who's leading the business here, of what it might look like as a venue next year.
Yeah, and again, we always think about what is that fan experience and making sure that fan experience is great. Some of the other ones is like the bags. We've been a little bit behind our friends at Nissan Stadium in Bridgestone on they want clear bags and all that stuff, and we've taken an approach of allowing bigger bags and not necessarily clear bags, and a lot of it's because I watch my wife bring 3 kids into the ballpark and have a bag full of stuff to keep them busy, as you do, and so we don't want to send that mom back to her car, and so we've been a little bit slower on kind of forcing some of those clear bag policies and different things in the past, but again, this might force us to start going that direction. And one of the big things, you don't want our security guards touching everything in a bag, and so clear bags are starting to look like they make a lot more sense than they did a year or two ago.
Even though you were hoping it would have been baseball here in September with that alternate season, the possibility of concerts is pretty cool. And I'm sure you're getting asked by people, who might it be? What might the acts be? I'm sure there are a lot of things to iron out, and you can't share all of it, but there was a concert here with Kings of Leon a couple of years ago that went really well. So clearly this venue can host things like that, even if 2020 is going to make it look a little bit different. That possibility's got to be pretty cool.
Yeah, and it's the fun thing is it's been in the works about as long as the alternate season. It's been an idea. It kind of became plan B for a long time because baseball's what we know, and we got really excited about putting that alternate season together. But this has been in the works. We've been talking with some promoters for back almost till May, and working this idea. They've kind of just been on the back burner until we made a decision on baseball, and once that decision of baseball kind of coming and going, we shifted gears, and we're a lot further along than we probably should be, just because we've kind of kept it as plan B and kept pushing it, knowing that scenario, back to not having that crystal ball of how long this lasted, we knew that there was possibility that we get to August without baseball and run out of time. So we've always been looking at what that other option is and how to keep this ballpark at least as full as we're allowed to.
Between the involvement of 2020, I know we're not doctors, but you hear about the good possibility of a vaccine of some sort, and April of 2021 in a lot of ways seems like far off. I feel like there's plenty of reasons to think that we can have a normal, or at least a new version of normal from a baseball standpoint by April 2021. I know you mentioned you're inherently optimistic. Do you feel that way about baseball next year?
You know, I do, and I have become more pessimistic over the time because I keep saying
you've been tested.
I've been tested a lot, but I do think I still can't believe that it lasts all the way till April.
Right.
And hopefully we get to a point that we can be back up and running and doing our business again. But the minor league baseball as a whole could look completely different. This is one of the unique years that our agreement with Major League Baseball is up, and so they're negotiating some different things with Major League Baseball as we speak, and so it'll be interesting to see kind of the new direction of what minor league baseball looks like. I don't think the model has been tested for 50, 75 years. It's been pretty steady for a long time, and Manfred and some of those folks are looking at changing things more than they have in the past. So luckily here in Nashville, everything should be nice and smooth, but again, 2021 might look completely different than what we're used to. So a whole nother challenge than what we usually have.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about that to end, and at least if there's anything you would want to remind fans at this stage. I think for a lot of it, the Sounds are kind of just waiting to see how that plays out, but I'm sure you get the same questions like I do. If the article comes out, people say, hey, I heard some minor league teams might go away, and then you're left answering questions that you don't necessarily know the answers to, but at the same time, we know some answers. The Sounds are in no jeopardy of ceasing to exist next year. This is a great ballpark. The organization is well run. So like there's sort of this talking off the ledge when an article comes out about that. But at the same time, you're right. We don't know what, there might be some realignment. It's just a lot of unknowns right now. So what would you want people to think about right now based on what next year could look like?
Yeah, you know, luckily I think we're the best ballpark in the country and the best staff and the best operation in general. So Major League Baseball loves what we're doing here. I think a lot of the teams that are going away is mainly because of the facility and not having, they don't want to, Major League teams don't want to put $7 million into a shortstop and then he go to some ballpark that has holes in it and not playing conditions, and then he gets hurt and that $7 million investment goes away. So
some lower levels of the minor leagues.
Yeah, so a lot of it's facilities, standard stuff, and but again, we got the best ballpark in the country, so we have no worries about the future here. It might just change kind of the teams we play, and a lot of it's kind of travel dictated. They don't want their guys necessarily flying to Tacoma anymore, and they want to make sure that the team in Washington Nationals aren't having their AAA team in Fresno just because they're the last ones to be picked. So they're wanting to change some of that kind of stuff up to where it makes more sense for the big league team. But I think we have a great partnership with the Rangers, and we'll continue that. And I don't see a whole lot changing.
Yeah, I think a lot of what gets rumored about with what they might do makes a lot of sense. I think, you know, those of us who work in the minor league baseball world just want our friends around the industry to have a chance. You hear about teams in smaller markets, so you're rooting for them to get a chance to be part of it rather than cut from the table. Yeah, that's how I feel about it.
It's the 160 teams have been around for a long time, so we become friends. It's a fraternity of some sort, and to see these guys that they do all the same stuff we do, just smaller market and smaller opportunity, and you hate to see that for them, but minor league baseball, there's great leadership there, and it'll continue to do well. It's just a lot of decisions that we're not sure where they're going to go. I think Rob Manfred showed that he's makes decisions a little different than everybody else. So there might be things that come up that we're not ready for, but I think minor league baseball as a whole, we adapt and get better every time.
Well, you mentioned it. You've been tested this year with your optimism, but let's end on a positive note. I mean, you've got a lot that I think is driving more optimism, whether short term or long term, and I'm sensing that you're just trying to stay as positive as you always try to be.
Yeah, and again, having all these different plans, and now that we're starting to shift gears and do some these concerts, it gets us really excited to just showcase that we can be more than baseball. We can be a venue that again brings that quality of life to Nashville. We want to be that, and we want to showcase how we can adapt with all these new rules and kind of show Nashville how we can open big venues again. And we wanted to be the leader in it, and hopefully we have a chance to show that we can be a leader in bringing fans back to these large venues.
Thanks a lot for your time. I've wanted to have you on the podcast version of Rounding Third for a while. I never thought these would be the topics we discussed when I had you on, but that's 2020. But thanks as always for your time.
Hey, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
That's Adam Nuse. Thanks so much for joining us, whether on video or on audio today, here on a special edition of Rounding Third.